Good afternoon, Angelinians. Paxet Venia Adeo. Let's now have our AUF prayer, followed by the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father in heaven, we, the AUF community, consecrate ourselves to the cause of truth, that in all our aspirations we may contribute to the greater good. Born from the heart of the Church, grant us the commitment to serve, promote dignity of every person, and build an authentic human society. May we constantly strive to become mabuti, magaling, at may malasakit sa kapwa, that we may attain total development of humanity for your greater glory. Amen. Saint Francis of Assisi, teach us to follow your footsteps by living a simple life. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Okay, good afternoon once again, Angelinians. Paxet Venia Adeo. I am Ma'am Trixie Arceo, and with me this afternoon is Ma'am Forteza Canlas. Good afternoon, Ma'am Fort.
Good afternoon, Ma'am Trixie. Good afternoon, Angelinians. Accept Venia Adeo.
Okay. So for today, Ma'am Fort and I are going to discuss the remaining topics for the prelim period, and these are the models of communication and the barriers, okay, barriers to communication. So after this discussion or this live streaming, we will be sending you the link, okay, for the quiz. So you will be having a quiz after this live stream. So make sure that you stay all throughout the entire discussion. Okay. And if you have questions, we will also send you a different link wherein you can type in your questions there and they will be answered on your next SLA activity. Okay. So let's start, Ma'am Ford. Okay, so we have models of communication. When we say model, okay, it describes an object, an event. It can also describe a process, okay, or relationship. Well, it attempts to represent the essential or major features of what it models or of what it represents. Now, academic scholars have developed several models in order to explain the social process of communication. As we have discussed before, in our first module, we have the process of communication. Now, how do we explain this further? So, these models of communication were developed, okay, to give us a visual representation of complex interactions. Now, these models, they provide pictures. They are also useful because they simplify the basic structure of communication, and it can help us to understand uh, that particular structure, okay, not just verbally, but also visually. And most importantly, these models identify the various elements of communication, and they also serve as a kind of map, okay, to show us how different parts of the communication process are interrelated. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so first we have the Shannon-Weaver model. Okay, so this model was originally designed for telephone communication. Okay, this was designed in 1949. Okay, Shannon developed the theory to improve understanding of communication via telephone and eventually improve the quality of phones. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Ma'am Ford. Thank you. Okay, so the Shannon-Weaver model, this is known as the mother of all communication models, okay, because of its wide popularity. So if you are going to search online for the models of communication, this is the first one that will appear in your search engine. The model is also known as information theory, or it is also known as the Shannon theory, because Claude Shannon was the main person who developed the theory. Next, it is a linear model of communication that provides a framework for analyzing how messages are sent and received. This model is specially designed to develop the effective communication between the sender and the receiver. It describes how a sender, okay, transmits a message to a receiver or listener. And more specifically, the sender is the source of the message. And this message may consist of sounds, words, or behaviors in a communication interaction. And I hope that, Angelinians, I hope that you have your journals with you. You may take down notes as we go further in the discussion. Next, ma'am.
Ma'am Trixie, I
Yes, ma'am.
apologize for the interruption. A student sent me a message telling me there is no PowerPoint being presented.
Ah, ma'am, ano muna siguro, stop presenting ka, ma'am, and then you present na lang po ulit.
Okay.
Okay, so I hope the PowerPoint presentation is visible now. Okay, anyway, so let me continue. Thank you, ma'am, for okay. The Shannon-Weaver model. Okay, this is also best known for its ability to explain how messages can be mixed up and misinterpreted in the process between sending and receiving the message. Well, the model's primary value is in explaining how messages are lost and distorted in the process of communication. And we will talk more about that as we go on. Now, I know that in our previous discussions, um, one of the elements of communication is the feedback, right? But in this model, it lacks one essential element, and which is feedback. Okay? Now, this model also depicts communication as a one-way process, and it consists five elements. And these elements are, next slide, please, ma'am. Okay, so first we have the source. The Shannon-Weaver model starts with the sender, or we may also call it the information source. Okay, it is the person or the object or any information source. Okay, who has the information to begin with. Now, the information starts with or starts the process by choosing a message to send. Okay, and also someone to send the message to, and a channel through which to send the message. A sender can send a message in multiple ways or different ways. It can be orally or through spoken word or spoken language. It can be through writing or through body language, music, gestures, or facial expressions, etc. Now, an example of a sender might be the person who is reading a newscast on the nightly news. Now, the next element is what we call the transmitter. So the transmitter converts the message into signals. Okay. So the encoder is the machine, okay? Or sometimes it can also be the person that converts the idea into signals that can be sent to the receiver. Okay. Now, the Shannon model was designed originally to explain communication through means such as telephone and computers. Okay, and this means or this medium, they or this media, they encode our words using codes. Okay, like binary digits or radio waves. Now, the sender's messages converted into signals are converted now into signals, and uh, they can be reduced in size, okay, to transmit the messages through cables and satellites. Next slide, please. I sorry, ma'am. Sorry. Okay. Now the channel refers to how the message is sent. This is the next element of the Shannon-Weaver model. This could be um, sound, okay? It can be a sound through the airwaves, okay, in a spoken conversation. Okay? Or they can also be data transmitted electronically in an email or a text. Okay. Now, of course, depending on the channel, the sender and the receiver may need equipment, okay, for this, such as phones or computers. Now, when the message arrives, okay, it must be decoded. Now, this stage describes how the receiver interprets the message and converts it into language. So, again, this could be a machine that does this electronically, or it could be our brains, okay? When we pick up on all the language and communication data, and which includes words, visuals, intonation, and so on. So that form a communication transaction. Okay. Examples for this are when you send emails, okay, using the World Wide Web or the internet as a medium. Another example is when you talk to someone on a landline or using your cell phones, okay? So, and if we are face to face, okay, perhaps we don't have a channel, well, except the sound waves from our voice that carry the sound from the sender's mouth to the receiver's ear. And the final elements for this model are the receiver and the destination. So here, finally, the receiver has received the message. Okay. And in this part, it will be interpreted by his or her brain into something meaningful. Now, the receiver is the endpoint of the Shannon and Weaver's original linear framework. So this is the step where the person finally gets the message or what's left of it after accounting for noise. Well, class, the Shannon-Weaver model, it's not perfect. Okay. Well, it was created so many years ago, and it has been developed through the years. Okay. Well, as well as not focusing on differences in human interpretation, it has also been criticized for oversimplifying the process and making communication seem linear and one way. It also struggles to support modern multimedia, just like what we're using now, wherein mass audiences can access information at different times. Okay? However, the fundamental principles are still relevant. That's why we are still studying them or this model up to now. And it has served as the building block, okay, for many other modern models, okay, and theories of how we communicate. But recently, I read this. According to Drew in 2021, a later version of the theory by Norbert Weiner added a seventh concept, which is feedback. Okay? And it changed the model from linear to cyclical model. Okay? Because the Shannon-Weaver model was initially designed for electronic communication, it doesn't really focus on the additional human factors that could also influence how a receiver decodes their message. Okay, factors such as language or cultural differences. Okay, and here, such factors like what I have mentioned, language difference or differences in language or differences in culture, uh, they could be applied here. Okay, uh, and are they can be separated to the noise, okay, that might exist in the communication channel. Well, anyway, these are all important factors that you will need to consider. And of course, as we have mentioned when we discussed the process of communication, okay, we all know that the process is not always that simple. Okay, it may seem simple to you, but it's not, because there are, or oftentimes there are obstacles to communication. Okay. Therefore, the Shannon-Weaver model introduces the concept of noise. Okay. Noise. Okay. So, but in the field of communication, noise refers to anything that inhibits the message that is being communicated or from being received. Okay. This could literally be background noise, okay, which makes it hard for a receiver to hear a message, or it could be distractions, okay, which prevent them from focusing on the communication. Now, uh, uh, one good example for this is when you are having your online classes, okay, and then you have background noise, or let's say your teacher, okay, your teacher has background noise, okay, like dogs barking, okay. In my case, okay, our dogs they always bark whenever I have classes, so or or the chickens, okay, or if the neighbors they have music, they play music. Okay, so these are distractions, okay, and they prevent you from focusing on the discussion of your teacher. Okay, or you can also imagine talking to someone who is in a great deal of pain, say physical pain, or perhaps stress or emotional anguish. then all of those feelings would constitute noise. Okay? And it would limit, okay, their ability to focus on and interpret the message. Okay? Noise refers to anything which interferes in the channel. Okay? It's in the channel stage of the model. So there are several different types of noise. Okay, in your module, we are going to publish our modules on Monday now. Okay, now in your module, we gave two. We have the internal noise and external noise. Well, internal noise, also called psychological noise, it describes internal distractions that hinder communication. Examples of internal noise are your emotions, okay, like fear or depression, anger, or if you are overly excited about something, okay? So it may cause you to become muddled in the communication, okay? And it can also hinder understanding or clear speech, okay? Especially if you are experiencing fear, right? Have you heard um, audio recordings of 911 calls, okay, calls from people who are in distress. Okay, there are times when the 911 operator would ask them to repeat what they said, okay, because it's inaudible. Okay, they cannot understand, okay, what the caller was saying because of this internal noise, which is fear. Okay. And external noise happens when something external or it is not or it is beyond your control, okay? The control of the sender or the receiver, okay? When this noise impedes the message, okay? Examples of external noise. Um, when you are talking to someone on the phone near a construction site. Okay, of course, it's a construction site. Okay, it's noisy there. People are noisy. The equipment are noisy. Okay, so chances are you would be able to understand each other. Okay. Another example is uh, when you are on the streets and you are talking to someone, whether on over the phone or face to face, and you cannot understand or hear each other because of the sound of the cars or the sound of the people. Okay, by a busy highway. So things like that. And the last element is the receiver. It is the second person in the conversation. And of course, the message is intended for the receiver. Okay. Next slide, ma'am. Kindly click. Okay. So next we have the Schramm's interactive model. So you pronounce this Schramm. Okay. This model is proposed by Wilbur's Schramm in 1954. Okay, this is also known as the Osgood Schramm model of communication. Now, it emphasizes that next slide, ma'am. Thank you. It emphasizes that communication is incomplete unless and until the sender receives a feedback from the recipient. Now, unlike other communication models, okay, unlike in the Shannon-Weaver model, this model is circular, okay, because it consists of all the essential elements of communication. And this model states that communication is a two-way highway, okay? It means that information passes between the sender and the receiver. Now, one part of this model states that the message passes from the sender to the receiver, but similarly, when the receiver sends a message back to the sender, okay, the role now becomes reversal or it's now reverse, okay, because The sender now becomes the receiver and vice versa. Okay, so I repeat. Okay, once the receiver, okay, gives his or her feedback, okay, their roles are reversed. Okay, the sender now becomes the receiver, and the receiver now becomes the sender. Okay. Okay, and we also have there the terms encoder and decoder. When we say encoder, this is the sender of the message, and the decoder is the receiver of the message. If you remember when we discussed the communication process, I told you that the one who performs the encoding is the sender, while the one who performs the decoding is the receiver. Okay, always remember that. Now, usually when information reaches the recipient, okay, the recipient now aims to comprehend what the sender is trying to convey. Now, if the receiver cannot comprehend or decode the message, then the entire process of communication is of no use. Okay? Because information is useless until it is carefully put into words and conveyed to others. Now, in the move to a more dynamic view of communication, interactional models, they follow two channels in which communication and feedback flow between sender and receiver. Okay, so when we say feedback, it is simply a response, okay, that the receiver gives to a sender. Okay, it can be verbal or non-verbal. Okay. And the final feature of this Schramm model is the field of experience. Okay, so we have there the term field of experience. When we say field of experience, it refers to how the environment or the experiences, culture, and even heredity, okay, can influence how a sender constructs a message. On the other hand, feedback must be given utmost importance as well. Okay, not only the message being sent. Okay, a feedback indicates comprehension. Okay? It can help senders know if their message was received and understood. Now, by focusing on flow and feedback, okay, this model views communication as an ongoing process. Okay, so the sender will send a message, the receiver will give a feedback, and then the sender now becomes a receiver, and then she will become a sender again. So it's a cycle. It goes on and on. Okay, until the interaction ends. Okay, next slide, ma'am. Next, we have White's communication um, model. So Eugene White, okay, or Eugene White's model, tells that communication is circular and continuous. Okay, so this is somewhat similar with Schramm's, okay, without a beginning or an end. Okay, and the concept of feedback was also introduced here. This model implies a step-by-step sequence, and it starts with the thinking, okay, on the part of the speaker. Remember when we discussed the fundamentals of communication? The first step there is to think before you speak. You have to conceptualize, okay? Or you have to generate the idea first, okay, before you encode it. Okay? He described, or Eugene White described the process as sequential, okay, following the 8 stages of oral communication. So as you can see in White's model, so we have eight, okay, 8 stages. So we have thinking, which refer to desire, feeling, or emotion that uh, uh, that comes from the speaker. Okay, we have symbolizing, expressing, transmitting, receiving, decoding, and feedbacking, and monitoring. When say monitoring, while the speaker watches for signs of reception or understanding of his message among his listeners, He's also attuned to what's going on inside him. So the speaker is receiving and decoding messages about himself from his audience in order to adjust to the particular situation. So next slide, ma'am. So I am going to show you a short video about, or that will show White's communication model. Ma'am, permission to present po, Ma'am Ford. Thank you, ma'am. So I want you to watch this, okay? Ma'am Ford, may audio po yung video.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, thank you, ma'am. You may present again, Ma'am Ford. Thank you po. Okay, so that is how White's model of communication works. Okay. Next, we have the transaction model. So that is the transaction model. As you can see, um, there are a lot of noise, okay, within the communication process. So here, the transaction model is a two-way process with the inclusion of feedback. Okay, it can be the exchange of messages. Okay, and between the sender and the receiver, and here they take turns. Okay, in sending and receiving messages, and this model also is more interactive. Okay, and collaborative exchange of messages between the communicators, and their aim is understanding each other. Okay? But here, in this model, it shows that a barrier, okay, such as noise, may interfere with the flow of communication. So later on, Ma'am Fort will discuss these barriers. Now, this transaction model, it is also comprised of essentially the following components. So we have the speaker, the message, and the listener. Okay, so I hope you have your journals ready so you can take down notes. Next slide, ma'am. So first we have, okay, for the speaker, we have four. Okay, because the speaker must evaluate himself on four key areas every time he communicates. Okay, and these are the purpose, knowledge of subject and communication skills, attitudes towards self and listeners and the subject, and the degree of credibility. So let's talk about these four key areas. Okay, the speaker's purpose. Now, every speaker has a purpose or a goal to achieve. Okay, right? Whenever you want or whenever you communicate with someone, okay, you have this purpose. So it may simply be uh, you want to befriend someone, or it can be more complex, like trying to change one's beliefs and behaviors. Okay. Now, a speaker may also wish to inform or add knowledge, or a speaker may also want to entertain, uh, impress, inspire, or motivate. So, in all cases, a speaker has direction, okay, and thus acts in a goal directed manner. So, if you have this purpose in mind, so you will be able to mm, you will be able to know, okay, or to choose the right words to say. You will be able to choose the appropriate medium and so on. So it starts with the purpose. Okay. Same thing is true also in writing. Remember our lesson or our course last semester. Okay. You have to think of your purpose first. What is your purpose? Why are you communicating with this person? Okay. Next, we have the speaker's knowledge. So, well, generally, okay, listeners, they await a speaker with high expectations. Okay. Does the speaker display deeper than surface knowledge of his subject? Does he share new, fresh, relevant, and significant insights? Is there depth in his message? Or can he be considered an authority on the subject? Does his message make it worth their while? Okay, so these questions are asked by the listeners. So if you are the speaker, make sure that you will be able to meet the expectations of your audience. Okay. Now, for you to be able to do that, number one is you have to prepare. If you're going to give a speech or if you're going to report in class, you have to prepare. Okay. Number two is you have to know your audience. Okay. Because you might be, if you do not know your audience, then you might be giving a lecture. Okay. You might be giving a lecture that are not in tune with the norms or that are not accepted in their culture. Okay, so it's better if you study, if you know, if you get to know your audience. Okay. The next key area is the speaker's attitude. Okay. A baseline source of a healthy attitude towards self and others. Okay, is your self concept, how you view yourself or how you see yourself. Okay, uh, this term is usually grouped together with self-worth, self-esteem, okay, self-efficacy, and self-image. So if you are the speaker and you are going to speak in front of a crowd, how would you like to project your image, or what image would you like to project? Okay. So it's important that you have this attitude. Okay. Next, we have the speaker's credibility. When listeners judge a speaker to be high in trustworthiness, competence, sincerity, attractiveness, okay, the speaker's chance of success will be high. Okay. Well, otherwise, okay, if the uh, if your audience, okay, will doubt whatever it is that you're saying, or uh, are bored, okay, during your lecture, okay, then uh, speech communication transaction will be a failure. Okay? So you have to, if you are the speaker, you have to build your credibility. Okay? Next, we have the message. Now, under message, we have uh, three: content, structure, and style. Okay? So, first, we have content. Now, mere facts or descriptions do not make a content. Okay, remember that. Mere facts or descriptions do not make a content. Okay, something more substantial is needed, but especially if you're going to deliver a speech. Okay, now content can be likened to an umbrella. Okay, wherein the shade, okay, uh, has certain or has selected ideas and information that come under. So content is conceptualized by the speaker, okay, according to his purpose for a particular audience. Now, your content, okay, must be must have evaluative materials that will form your view of the topic. Okay, so you have to. That's why you have to be very careful in creating or generating your content. Okay? Just like what you see on YouTube, the content creators. Okay, so those are well thought of. Okay, because if they are not, if the content is not well thought of, then they won't have as many subscribers as they have right now, right? Because some they have millions or hundreds of thousands. It's because the content is good, or or the audience can relate to their content. Okay, and their content has substance. Okay. Next, we have the structure. So, presenting ideas, facts, and information in any which way, okay, whatever way, we call that the structure. How you present your ideas, okay, your facts. But your structure needs to be one in which your ideas, the facts, and the information can be properly and effectively understood, okay, through patterns or coherent arrangements or sequencing of ideas. So if you remember our lesson last semester, the patterns of development, okay, so the structure should be present there. Now, such arrangement gradually guides, okay, and leads the listeners to grasp or to understand or to comprehend your message, okay? And at the end, there must be unity of thought. Next, we have the style. Okay? So, personal and impersonal, okay, intimate or distant, poetic or plain, okay? You communicate your speaking style when you select certain words and arrange them in some way. Okay? Now, style often refers to those aspects of language that convey impressions of your personality, okay, or your view of the world, or your individuality, or your uniqueness as a person. Now, since both sender and receiver are necessary, okay, to keep the communication alive in the transactional model, the communicators are also interdependent to each other. Okay, for example, um, transactional communication is not possible if the receiver is not listening to the sender. Okay? So let's now move on to the listener. So here, for the listener, we have purpose, knowledge and interest, command of listening skills, and attitudes as well. So often, listeners come to listen with single or multiple expectations. Okay, some want to hear the latest on a raging controversy. Others, they simply want to see what a person looks and sounds like. Or still others come to be entertained or humored. Well, speakers must watch their listeners' expectations in order to succeed. And it is important to know that listeners want their needs to be satisfied. Okay? Let's say, just like watching a movie. Okay, let's say if it's a horror movie. So you go to the movie house to watch it, and you expect that you will be uh, you'll be experiencing fear or horror after watching the film. Okay, but what if it? But what if you did not feel that way? So same thing also with communication. So you are talking to the person, okay, and there are certain expectations that you set, okay, before you start this conversation with someone else. So you being the speaker, okay, you have to know, okay, what your what your listeners need, okay, what are their expectations also. That should be one of your purposes also. Next, we have knowledge and interest. Okay? Now, as a listener, okay, how little or how much do you know about the topic? Now, if you are the speaker, you have to take this into consideration, the knowledge and the interest of your listener. Would they care to hear or be attracted to listen to the topic at hand? Will they be interested in whatever you're going to say? Okay, how much do they know about the topic that you are presenting? So, a thoughtful speaker would not initiate a message without first studying his audience, okay, on these two critical areas, because these are areas of high impact, okay, the knowledge and interest of your listeners. Okay, so remember that. Next, we have the command of listening skills. Listeners vary in listening skills. Okay, some are naturally receptive, while others can't wait to hear the speaker's final thank you or good day, and so on. Now, the degree of appreciation in a listener is a function of his listening skills. So, training in the discipline of listening is vital to any form of human communication. And lastly, we have attitudes. Now, since attitudes of persons are generally shaped by the values that they hold, okay, it would be unwise for a speaker to antagonize his audience with contrary opinions. Okay, because listeners, they tend to seek out speakers whose beliefs and views they already agree with, okay, and retain longer those ideas that they strongly approve of. Now, a speaker, okay, if you are a speaker and you wish to alter or to change the views of your listeners, you must first start from familiar and common ground, and then slowly build up to your contrasting ideas. Okay? Next slide, ma'am. Okay. So there are many factors that directly or indirectly affect, okay, the communication process in the transaction model. Now, your speech is affected and influenced by the physical setting, okay, and social context in which communication occurs. Okay. A social context is a particular combination of people, purposes, places, rules, and conventions that interact communicatively. Okay, so societies observe certain customs, norms, and traditions that form the framework for social interactions. Okay? Now, elements of communication may have different meanings. Okay, and this depend upon the culture or the society in which the communication takes place. Okay, just like for instance, uh, this is just an example. If you are visiting a friend's house, okay, if you are visiting a friend, okay, and then when you go there, you do not say po or opo to the elders because you, at your home, you do not practice that. Don't say po and opo. Okay? You are not used to that. You're not used to saying po and opo to elders. Then when you go to other person's house or to your friend's house and you don't do that or you don't say po and opo, okay? So uh it will have a different impression. Okay, so the people that you are communicating with in that house, okay, okay, they will have um, a different interpretation or a different impression of you. Okay, And that impression is based on what they have observed on you, okay, without knowing yet your background, right? So it is important that before you start communication, okay, you have to know, okay, what should be taken into consideration, like the culture or the environment, okay, the people involved in the interaction. So you have to know all of that. Okay. Next slide, ma'am. Okay, so earlier I mentioned about noise, which interferes in the communication process. Okay, so these barriers lead to communication breakdown. Now, if they are not addressed appropriately, well, your communication will not be effective or successful. Okay, so next slide, ma'am. So I will now give the floor to Ma'am Ford, and she will discuss the different barriers that hinder effective communication. Let me present my screen.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Trixie, for that meaty discussion of the models of communication. So, Angelians, I hope somehow you already have an idea about those different models of communication. Probably before Ma'am Trixie had shared with you this topic on the models of communication, probably I think majority are not really very familiar about those elements being embedded or having this some sort of interaction as presented in those different models. Okay, so much has been said about noise. Okay, so noise um, as a barrier to communication from the models discussed by Ma'am Trixie a while ago. So there were a lot of noise examples enumerated by Ma'am Trixie, especially recalling those two terms about internal and external noise. And so the continuation of the lecture for this afternoon's webinar is on barriers to communication. So, congratulations. This is our last module for the prelim period. Okay, so much has been said about all of these models and then about all of these elements of communication. But have you found yourself in the past trying to recall or trying to identify the thing that you have done wrong or did not do, in that before you entered into a communication situation, you believe you are really very prepared for it. Okay, so you're very prepared for it, and then suddenly there is a communication breakdown that happened. Okay, so have you ever wondered why, in some instances, when speaking to a specific group of people or to a certain person, so communication breakdown is inevitable or unavoidable, and then you try to evaluate everything. Okay, so in my case, I would always tell myself, I am a graduate of ABBSE in English. So there's communication, there are language theories. I even earned a degree for my master's in linguistics. And then sometimes just trying to evaluate the way that I would be communicating things to my husband. Sometimes we would really be having this misunderstanding. Okay, so the thing is you are not looking into this very, shall I say, essential element in communication, which you really need to somehow study, okay, or take a look back. And this is what we call the barriers to communication. So there are many reasons why interpersonal communications may fail. So in many communications, the message, so this is what is said, may not be received exactly the way the sender intended. It is therefore important that the communicator seeks feedback, okay, to check that the message is clearly understood. Okay, so it is also true, I believe you'll agree with me here, that there are essential skills to help you become an effective communicator. So, to name a few, you have the skills of active listening, then you have the skill of doing some clarifications and reflections. But the skilled communicator also needs to be aware of the barriers to effective communication and, of course, how to avoid or overcome them. So, barriers may lead to your message becoming distorted. And so, you therefore risk wasting both time and or money by causing confusion and misunderstanding. Okay, so we now proceed to these barriers to communication. Okay, next slide po, Ma'am Trixie. So you'll see a table presented on screen. So the first one is emotional barriers. So you have there an example and then a column which talks about the solution. So the example for the emotional barriers is you're having a bad day or you feel frustrated and then you are bored. So what are the solutions to this? So you need to pause and stop for a while. You need to recognize that this kind of emotion, you're being frustrated, you're having a bad day, you need to recognize that this is existing, that this is true to you for that day. And then if you have someone or another person who is or who plans to talk to you in that specific moment, you can just politely ask the person to give you a moment to relax or calm yourself. Okay, for the emotion of being bored, you also need to recognize that kind of attitude and reflect on how you can be interested. So, when we say emotional barriers, the table actually will be showing you four barriers to communication, which would be later on be connected to the different categories of noise in communication, which were already mentioned a while ago by Ma'am Trixie. So I will just be mentioning them again for emphasis. So going back into the emotional barriers. So when we say emotional barriers, we're also referring to some topics that are considered taboo. So some people may find it difficult to express their emotions. And so sometimes there are topics that are off limits or taboo topics. Okay, so what are the example taboo topics or difficult topics? This may include but are not limited to, a example, very timely, politics. Who are, I know you're not yet qualified to vote. Some are 17 or below 18. So, but who is your presidential candidate? Who are you vying for? Is it BBM? Is it Lenny? Okay, would it be Isko Moreno? And then it could also be religion. Okay, sometimes could also be about disabilities, so mental and physical disabilities. Then about sexuality or sex, gender, racism, and an opinion that may be seen as unpopular. Okay, so emotional barriers can also be equated with psychological barriers. Okay, so when you say psychological barriers, you're referring to the psychological state of the communicators, which will influence how the message will be sent, received, and perceived. Okay, so for example, if someone is stressed, so they may be preoccupied sometimes by personal concerns. Example, in your case, I think majority are now trying to get along with the very very toxic schedule of submitting a lot of requirements, because this is the week, 2 weeks from now would be our prelim examination. And so there are a lot of piled up activities for you to accomplish. Okay, so sometimes stress management is a very important personal skill that affects your interpersonal relationships. So when you say interpersonal relationships, this definitely include the way that you communicate with others. Okay, so sometimes if you're stressed, you are not so good at digesting or getting the message clearly. Okay, so another is anger. Okay, so I believe this was also mentioned a while ago by Ma'am Trixie. This can be under psychological barrier too. So when we are angry, it's easy to say things that we may later regret. That is why you're always, or we are always reminded to just stop and pause when we are mad or when we are angry at someone. Okay, so when we say emotional barriers, this can also refer to the gestures that we can receive from people coming from different cultural backgrounds. For example, individuals from the UK and Japan typically keep a tight control of their emotions, while if you compare them with Italians and French, who are more comfortable showing their feelings. Okay, how about loud talking? So, loud talking might embarrass an Englishman, for example, but an Italian may just be expressing excitement. Okay, so when I was in college, I would always be getting this. I don't know if it's a complaint or a compliment telling us. I have a classmate who is from Guagua, and therefore she's also a Kapampangan, and would always tell us, you know what, Fort, whenever you talk with Lisa, you seem to be always so happy and excited about the things that you're talking, discussing about. Okay, so we really did not know if that became a barrier to effective communication to them. Okay, so however, differences, so what I'm saying is differences in culture and communication styles can even cause fear in communication. So, as a result of this anxiety, people from different cultures may pull back and then avoid trying to communicate at all. Okay, so being here at AUFIS, I believe you have experience, especially those who have been with us from preschool, LM, junior high school, that every year AUFIS has always been accepting foreign students, so coming from different cultures. I think the reason why a lot of foreign students are re-enrolling at IS is that they're not having any problem regarding communicating with their Filipino classmates. So we now proceed to the next one for the use of jargon. Okay. Thank you, Ma'am Trixie. For the use of jargon, so you will see in here that jargon as a type of language can be similar with what we call the language barriers. Okay, that's why language and linguistic ability may act as a barrier to communication. So the example that we have in there is, for example, your neighbor who is a scientist discusses a weather phenomenon to you and you do not know how much about the topic. So jargon refers to the set of specialized vocabulary in a certain field. To avoid communication breakdown due to a lack of clarity, adjust your language. Use layman's terms or simple words. It is in here, I guess, came about the popularity of master's topics in English or in linguistics when I was still taking up my master's, that there were this topics on lexicography. So when you say lexicography, this is the art of compiling or writing down or creating a dictionary. So there is a dictionary of Kapampangan cooking terms, okay, Kapampangan to Filipino or Tagalog, Kapampangan to English. Okay, so in that manner, this use of jargon or language barrier can be avoided or can be solved. So come to think of this. So for example, when people communicate in the same language, but the terminology used in a message may act as a barrier if it is not fully understood by the receiver. So for example, a message that includes a lot of specialist jargon and abbreviations will not be understood by a receiver who is not familiar with the terminology used. I am sure everyone had heard these words when pandemic started. We have this um, terms to refer to a COVID positive person, and then suddenly it was changed into, is it suspect? Ma'am Trixie, can you help me verify on that? The terms for
Yes, ma'am.
COVID positive, and then suddenly it became suspect. Is it a suspect word? Or
Um, those who are under, uh, wait, I forgot.
yeah, but I remember I had a really hearty laugh on that. It's because COVID positive, the label for COVID positive individuals suddenly was changed into like a
PUI,
person.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Persons
Yes,
under
the PUI.
investigation.
A person under investigation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it was somehow correlated with terms related to murder or not following the laws or the rules. Okay, so that is one example for the use of jargon. Okay, and I believe majority of you can agree with me when sometimes if you plan to get into the strand of the health sciences, and then you would be sharing about this to a classmate who would be into the IEA strand. Okay, so of course your jargons would be different. So it's better that you resort to the layman's terms, or when you say layman's terms, the common or simple words. Okay, so also it is in here where we have the regional colloquialisms. Okay, regional colloquialisms and expressions may be misinterpreted or even considered offensive. Okay, so the third one is what we call the lack of confidence. Okay, so for the lack of confidence, we can relate this one to the attitudinal barriers, okay, which are considered behaviors or perceptions that prevent people from communicating effectively. Okay, sometimes teachers would be able to spot or would be able to identify or discover among his or her students that there is this student who is really very good in expressing his thoughts or her thoughts publicly, but then because of this attitudinal barrier or the lack of confidence, so suddenly this person or this student would just be pulling out of the game. So it is just that this barrier or kind of barrier, attitudinal barriers, should be serving as a challenge for you as a person to improve on yourself. Okay, so attitudinal barriers. So in addition to the information about attitudinal barriers, including lack of confidence, may result from personality conflicts, sometimes poor management, sometimes resistance to change, or sometimes a lack of motivation. So, to be an effective receiver of messages, you should attempt to overcome your own attitudinal barriers to help ensure more effective communication. Okay, and I guess we are now down into the last barrier to communication, which is the noisy environment. Okay, so for number four, this noisy environment was actually being given emphasis a while ago by Ma'am Trixie in a specific model of communication where noise is evident, present in the model. So noisy environment will not just be giving you an idea about example of a noisy environment would be the chairs moving, the cars, okay, passing by. But we have this five types of noises in communication. So for the five types of noises in communication, okay, so Ma'am Trixie, can we move to the next slide? I'd like you to see and check on this five types of noises in communication. So you'll be seeing that we have physical, physiological, psychological, syntactical, and cultural. For physical noise, when we say physical noise, we are referring to the external noise. So Ma'am Trixie had given examples of this a while ago. So when we say external noise or under physical noise, so these are all unnecessary sounds that serve as obstacle to effective communication. Okay? So what are the other examples of physical noise? Okay, so ma'am, can we have the next slide? So there you go. So you'll have this samples of physical noise. So everything that you hear. Okay, so a while ago, Ma'am Trixie had reminded me of her example about the dogs which are barking and the chickens in the backyard. Okay, so all of this, and then the neighbors who would be playing their music so high with the high volume, highest volume. Okay, so this is what we call physical noise. Okay, so example of physical noise. So aside from all of those, so this would could be the vehicle sounds. This could be the other kinds of noise that can just be heard whenever you are doing something. Okay, so next is physiological noise. So physiological noise in communication is a barrier created by the communicator's physical condition. So usually this would refer to the physical illness or the weakness. Okay, so the weakness of that person's body would be the physical noise. Okay, and then of course that will be hindering effective communication. So for example, Ella is having headaches. Okay, so therefore, she cannot concentrate in class. So here, headache is a physical illness. It is a barrier to the listening process of communication. Before our Christmas break, I had received a lot of excuse letters telling me about this physiological noise, asking for an excuse because they really could not focus listening to SLA discussion because of the side effects of the first dose and the second dose of the vaccines for anti-COVID vaccines. Okay, so that is an example of a physiological noise. Okay. So next is we have psychological noise. So psychological noise in communication. So this would be the noise that will be created because of the values that you have, the beliefs, the attitudes, and the behaviors. So this type of noise interrupts our minds. Okay, so this types of noise interrupts our minds to concentrate on listening. Okay, so let's have an example of psychological noise. So for example, Ella is a Muslim girl. She doesn't like to listen to any criticism of Islam. Okay, of course, if you are a Muslim, you would be agreeing with Ella. You'd be having the same feeling with Ella. So, with that one being discussed, so Ella would become distracted. So, that becomes a psychological noise. So, Ella will not be listening anymore, and therefore, communication will not take place. So if you have noticed sometimes when you are hearing any sensitive issues, okay, like religious, ethnic, political, these are examples of psychological noise. If you are not into them, you will not really uh, engage in that communication situation. Next is we have the semantic noise. Okay, so from the word semantic, so semantic or semantics is a field of linguistics which refer to meaning, okay, word meanings. So there is this semantic noise, there is also this what we call syntactical noise. So semantic noise, it's a communication barrier created from confusion over the meaning of words. So a while ago, we had the use of jargon. This can be under semantic noise. Okay, so also we can have grammatical errors. So grammatically wrong sentences. Okay, and then the result of this is the receiver will not be clearly understanding the message. That is what we call syntactical noise. Okay, so and then the last one is what we call cultural cultural noise. So a while ago, Ma'am Trixie already had shared with you the cultural context, the cultural context in communication. Cultural noise would be stemming from the the agreed nonverbal communication of the different cultures. So intercultural communication would be finding it hard to disregard cultural noise in their communication situation. Okay, so this is a communication barrier created from the wrong explanation of another person's behaviors. Okay, so there are additional noises in the communication process. Okay, so we have organizational noise, and this what we call noise in group communication. So when we say organizational noise, okay, so let's first have what organizational communication is. So when we say organizational communication, we're talking about meetings or conferences or webinars being attended by people in that specific organization. Okay, so therefore, in that organizational communication, noise will always be present, especially when encoding and decoding noises would be present. Okay, what are these encoding and decoding noises? So encoding and decoding noises would be when the head of the company, for example, would be talking about targets of the company. Okay, so targets of the company. So the encoding decoding noises in corporate communication lack sensitivity to the receiver. For example, if the audience would just be having the basic communication skills. Okay, I remember a company where there are a lot of foreign workers, and then the foreign workers only have a basic knowledge of the English language, but the corporate head or the company head is only efficient in the use of the English language. So that becomes an organizational noise. For the receivers or the audience, the communication will become information overload. That is why there would also be an inclusion of emotional interference. Okay? So, additionally, the transmitting noises in organizational communication are the faulty connection of transmitting lines and channel barriers. So, I think you would be able to relate more in this group communication. So, for our online activities or required activities for our Canvas courses, so most of your subjects would require you to accomplish activities in groups. Okay, so what is that noise in group communication? So, noise in group communication would be the disturbances or the obstacles to interactive communication among group members. So, a number of complaints that we have been receiving from group leaders telling us, ma'am, this student, this group mate of ours will just be doing a sin zoning. Okay, this group mate of ours would be promising to accomplish this task, but will not be communicating with us anymore, will not be answering calls. Okay, so that is what we call noise in group communication. Okay, so in conclusion, for the barriers, communicators need to reduce noises as much as possible to make communication more effective, productive, and efficient. So these noises in communication are prevalent in every context of the communication process, such as barriers in face to face communication, barriers in mediated communication, barriers in corporate communication, and barriers in group communication. So remember that noises are the unwanted element of the communication process. So the transactional model of communication is more preferable to reduce noise in communication rather than a linear one. Okay, so that's the end of our barriers to communication. So we now conclude with the features of an effective communication. So the first feature of an effective communication, so we have seven. So we have seven C's of an effective communication. So completeness, conciseness, consideration, concreteness, courtesy, clearness, and correctness. So for completeness, of course, whenever you engage yourself in a communication situation, your target is your message will be clearly understood by another person, and you'll be getting the feedback that you are wanting to receive. Okay, and then the communication then would be an effective one. So for it to be complete, you need to be able to supply or include all of the details. Okay, answering the WH questions, the why, the how. Okay, so all of those details must be included. For conciseness, this will direct or give the receiver focus in digesting the message, because you would be keeping the message short. If not short, direct or straight to the point. So you will be eliminating, you will not be including insignificant and redundant information. The third one is consideration. So before you air out or before you say your ideas or thoughts, try to check details about your audience or receiver. I believe this was given emphasis by Ma'am Trixie a while ago in the models, okay, specifically with when it comes to the speaker, what are the traits that the speaker should be having before sharing or conveying a message. For concreteness, you can say that a message is concrete if it's supported by facts, figures, and real life examples and situations in this manner. This will give the receiver audience a clear picture of the message being conveyed. Courtesy. So the speaker respects the culture, beliefs, and values of his or her receiver. So being courteous creates a positive impact on the audience. So before you share something about culture, about beliefs, you really need to do a research about your audience, about the receiver of your talk or receiver of your message. Okay, so sometimes courtesy would also be very important with dealing with people when you would be using a simple sir and ma'am, for example. Okay, when you're inquiring about vaccination in vaccination centers, so makes a difference. So people will feel that you are treating everyone fairly. Okay, so you'd ask, sir, ma'am, is this what we are to do for before we get vaccinated? Okay, and then you'll see the difference on how that person will be answering you back. So clearness, so speaker uses simple specific words, so avoid jargon. You can use jargon if the receiver of your message shares similar specialization with yours. If you are both engineers, for example, okay, you can use jargons, so that would still make it clear for the other speaker. So another is the speaker needs to focus on one single objective in his or her speech so as not to confuse the audience. And then the last one is correctness. So one of our rules for online classes is the grammar police. So you need to really check on your grammar before submitting all of your outputs in Canvas. So correctness in grammar eliminates negative impact on the audience and increases the credibility and effectiveness of the message. So remember, credibility is a very important trait for a speaker, especially if that speaker is talking or presenting talks in front of an audience. Okay, so I think I am done with my part. So thank you, and may the good Lord reward us always. I think Ma'am Trixie will be having a reminder for everyone.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am Ford. So, dear Angelinians, please wait for the link to your quiz. So, we are going to give the link to your quiz through my class inbox. So, Ma'am Ford and I will give you the link, and you have to accomplish that on or before 5 p.m. today. Because after 5 p.m., it will close. Now, it will not accept responses anymore. Okay, I repeat, this will serve as your attendance as well as your quiz. I sorry. Okay, so once again, thank you, Ma'am Ford, and thank you, Angelinians, and may the good Lord reward us always. Have a good day. You wait for the link.